Good morning / good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you everyone for joining the Increasing Opportunities for Skills training session. During this session, I'll briefly discuss federal workforce funding streams before handing it over to our other speaker to discuss the work the San Diego Workforce Partnership has done to braid funds. Then we'll have a quick Q&A before breaking out into groups to workshop different braided funding ideas. We'll then come back as a larger group and share what we discussed in the smaller groups. My name is Brianna McCain, and I'm a state policy analyst at National Skills Coalition. To help me unpack this very important topic, I'm joined by Peter Karlstrom, who is the President and Chief Employment Officer of the San Diego Workforce Partnership. As many states focus on recovery, the importance of investing in skills training and supportive services has become elevated. While COVID relief funds have helped states chart a path towards an inclusive economic recovery, they are insufficient to meet the needs of states. Additionally, traditional federal workforce development funding streams individually are insufficient to meet the various needs of states. However, by braiding funds, the act of pulling multiple funding streams towards one's purpose, states can chart a path towards an inclusive economic recovery. Before I give a brief overview of different federal funding streams, I want to do a quick poll to learn more about your state's efforts to braid funds. So if you could answer the poll that has popped up on your screen, that would be great. The poll asks, how would you describe your state's efforts to braid funding to expand access to skills training and supportive services? Excellent, my state is leading on this issue. Good, my state has taken action to braid funding, but more work needs to be done. Fair, there is interest in braiding funding, but little to no action has occurred. Or this is not a priority for my state, but I would like it to be. So I'll give you a couple minutes to answer that question. All right, I'll give you about 10 more seconds before we close the poll. All right, so it seems like no one chose excellent. My state is leading on this issue. That's not surprising, but it seems like quite a few people, 65% said my state has taken action to braid funding, but more work needs to be done. So that's good. Other people have 35% chose there is interest in braiding funding, but little to no action has occurred. So it's good that it seems like this is a priority for most people's states, and it seems that at least some work has been done, and we can unpack that work when we go into our small breakout groups later. Now I want to shift to briefly discussing the various workforce development funding streams. In no way is this an exhaustive list, but I wanted to highlight some common workforce development funding streams before turning it over to Peter to discuss how the San Diego Partnership has braided various funding streams. So I know a lot of states are in the process of either utilizing or determining how they plan to utilize American Rescue Plan, also known as ARPA funding. Just to provide a quick overview, the American Rescue Plan Act is an investment of $350 billion to respond to COVID-19 emergency and bring back jobs. There are 4 funding objectives related to ARPA funding, one of which is to support urgent COVID-19 response efforts to continue to decrease spread of the virus and bring the pandemic under control. Another is to replace lost public sector revenue to strengthen support for vital public services and help retain jobs. Another is to support immediate economic stabilization for household and businesses. And the last funding objective is to address systemic public health and economic challenges that have contributed to the unequal impact of the pandemic. And what you see on your screen right now are examples that the US Department of Treasury has provided on how the funds may be used as it relates to the funding objectives. I specifically want to call out that these funds may be used for equity-focused services to address educational disparities. Additionally, these funds may be used to expand broadband infrastructure. When talking about digital skills, we often talk about the three-legged stool. So that's access to broadband, access to devices, and access to digital skills training as being necessary to help individuals and workers develop digital skills. So broadband is that first leg of the stool, and ARPA funding may go a long way to helping individuals have access to the necessary broadband. I also want to highlight that these funds may be used to support workers and families and support small businesses. There is quite a lot of flexibility with the ARPA funding. So for instance, Connecticut is using $5.3 million in ARPA direct state funds to support parent fees for Care for Kids, which is an initiative that helps low to moderate income families in Connecticut pay for childcare costs. This funding supplements additional money awarded directly to the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood, and these funds align with the state's efforts to temporarily open Care for Kids to families enrolled in higher education and workforce programs. In Illinois, ARPA funds are being used to support a new barrier reduction fund administered by the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Development. The Barrier Reduction Fund is attached to a newly revived state-funded job training grant program called the Job Training and Economic Development Grant Program. These are just a couple of examples of how states are using ARPA funds to further existing investments. Probably the most commonly referred to workforce development funding stream is WIOA, also known as WIOA. Specifically, WIOA Title I discretionary funds, often called the governor's WIOA Reserve Fund or the 15% funds, provide an opportunity for states to address workforce needs given the flexibility associated with those funds. WIOA Title II funds, which focus on adult education and family literacy, are particularly useful for supporting integrated education and training programs, especially in combination with WIOA Title I funds. And lastly, WIOA Title IV vocational rehabilitation funds can be used to support pre and post-employment services for people with disabilities. When working in tandem, complementary services under WIOA Title II and IV can be a powerful mechanism for upskilling adult learners with disabilities. The different WIOA title funding streams can be braided to support the upskilling of individuals. Another useful funding stream is the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program. It's important to note that this program provides aids to workers who have been adversely affected by foreign trade. Benefits of this program include training, job search allowances, case management, health coverage, employment services, and other benefits. So this is a useful funding stream to provide not only training, but supportive services to eligible recipients. Perkins 5, which invests in secondary and post-secondary CTE, is another useful funding stream. It's important to note that unlike WIOA funding, Perkins funding is linked to institutions rather than individual students or workers. That being said, Perkins provides states and local communities with a lot of flexibility to determine how to use its funding. Perkins funding can be used to support CTE programs, career exploration, guidance, and advisement, and efforts to identify and close equity gaps. I would encourage everyone to look at their state's Perkins plans to see how your state has decided to leverage this funding and what flexibility exists within that funding. Another useful funding stream that I'm sure you all are aware of is federal Pell Grants, which provide subsidies to low-income students through participating post-secondary education institutions. And then an often overlooked opportunity is the ability to benefit provision in the Higher Education Act. So ability to benefit allows individuals without a high school diploma or equivalent to access federal financial aid when they enroll in an eligible post-secondary career pathway and in adult education. As such, ability to benefit provides an on-ramp for low-wage workers who do not yet have their high school diploma to get access to federal Pell Grants. However, under ability to benefit, students can access Pell Grant funding only after they have successfully completed 6 college credits. States have 3 options to pay for the 6 credits for students. One is to administer a test that allows students to demonstrate eligibility for ability to benefit. Another is to use other sources like WIOA to fund the first 6 credits, or they can establish a state-defined process which requires federal approval. And a state leading in this work is Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Technical College System provided professional development and capacity building around ability to benefit to local community and technical colleges to elevate its importance. The state also succeeded in receiving federal approval for a state-defined process that allowed it to expand access to ability to benefit for students. I know a lot of states are focused on expanding access to a SNAP ENT. So SNAP ENT can be used to provide low-wage and displaced workers with access to skills training and supportive services. Specifically, ENT formula grants, which are also referred to as 100% funds, can be used for direct program expenses like tuition and fees, career navigation, and job development. However, an underutilized source of funding that states can be tapping into are the SNAP ENT 50% reimbursement grants, also known as 50/50 funds. These funds can be used to implement what's called a third-party model. So under the third-party model, SNAP ENT agencies contract with partners who are eligible non-federal funds to provide education, training, and supportive services. Partners then receive federal reimbursement for 50% of those costs. What makes this source of funding extraordinary is that 50% reimbursement grants are effectively uncapped at the federal level. Therefore, these grants can be a very useful source of funding for states. I'm sure you all are aware of TANF, but TANF funding can be used to provide cash assistance, childcare, coaching, and other supports to low-income families with children. And notably, the TANF block grants can be used to provide skills training. And last but definitely not least, we have the Child Care Development Fund, which is distributed in block grants to states and territories to provide childcare services to low-income families. Now that I provided a very high-level overview of federal workforce development funding streams, I'm going to pass it over to Peter to talk about what it looks like to braid these funds in practice and the advocacy efforts that work to achieve said braided funding.
All right, thanks, Brianna. I will try and share my screen here. One sec. Bear with me. Wouldn't be a good presentation if you didn't have technical difficulties. So there we are. All right, is that coming through okay?
I don't see your screen right now. At least maybe other people can, but I can't. I see that you've started screen sharing, but I don't see the PowerPoint that you're presenting.
Well, I see it. I guess that's all that needs to be seen, right? No, you can't. Still not coming through? Anything we can do to tweak that?
I think you can stop screen sharing and then try to share again and make sure that you
all right,
choose the screen that you specifically.
Here we go again. How's that?
It's still not working on my end, at least.
All right. One more sec. It says I'm screen sharing, but you're not seeing the deck at all.
No, I'm not seeing it.
Well, let's just go with it then. I'll talk through what I'm looking at and just try and convey that to the group. Thanks for having me, Brianna. That was a great overview of all of the different public funds that are out there and how to tap into them. And they vary wildly across the country and how they're deployed and how we can access them for a lot of different reasons. And One in particular that you outlined that we've been spending a lot more time on is the SNAP ENT, and that is a great resource. So really encourage all areas to look into that because it provides great services and it also enables us to be able to have some more resources that we can work with in a more unrestricted way. So that flexibility is critically important. So I just want to give you a quick snapshot of
Peter, I hate to interrupt you, but can you stop screen sharing so that people can see your face?
Oh boy, I don't know if we want to do that. Okay. All right, coming through okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So just want to give you a quick overview, a snapshot of what the Workforce Partnership is all about. So we serve the county of San Diego. It's quite a mega region, almost 3.5 million people. And we're the workforce board for the entire region. So the population is actually more than 20 states. We're the 5th largest county in the country. And we have a regional workforce of about 1.8 million people, very, very diverse. And we've been serving since 1974. We reach about 90,000 people, either directly or through our funded partners annually. Our annual budget's around 40 million currently. And just a quick look back, because we've worked very hard to expand and diversify our funding base in the past decade, especially. So only a decade ago, we were like many workforce boards that are completely reliant on public funds. And so we had 99% reliance on federal alone. So we were just that intermediary funder in order to get the dollars out to community partners in the region. We had no private sector or philanthropic support and little to no partnerships with our city or county for any funding flow. Also, big picture for the federal workforce funding, as many know, it's been a steady decline in the past 20 years. It's gone down nearly 40 or 50%. And so we're really hopeful that this infrastructure bill and the trailer bill can go through, because in whatever form, I mean, the current form of 100 billion would be a tenfold increase for a decade, but it's all hanging in the balance, as we know, if you follow in the news. So we don't know what may go through, and we certainly hope it's not going to get cut too much, because we're not even at the level that we all need across the country to serve our residents well. And a decade ago, we actually were in the hole. We had a $250,000 deficit that we had inherited from some past difficulties, high overhead. We really weren't doing much research or labor market information work, really antiquated technology. We had no marketing or communication, so we weren't doing newsletters or social media or anything in order to get the word out. And we also had a very fragmented governance, which was well intended as they had designed it in the past, but we had a 3-board structure, believe it or not, that led to what felt like not workforce development, but board development. And so a lot of time was spent duplicating, triplicating work. And if you remember, about a decade ago, we had this issue of sequestration and the fiscal cliff. And here we are 10 years later, and we're back to a fiscal cliff if they can't raise the debt ceiling. So some really interesting times that we're in. So fast forward a decade, about half of our funds now are made up of non-federal, non-public resources. So we've really worked hard to build up private sector and philanthropic support. And thankfully, it's gone very well, and credit to a great team for making that happen. And part of how we did that is through a real rigor around grant writing, grant seeking, relationship development that pays off over time. But you don't get there if you don't go out there and build these relationships with a lot of unique groups out there. So over time, too, our research in LMI has really expanded. We have a 4-person team now doing research in LMI, and led by a PhD economist who's really helping us dive deeper into this really important work, which then impacts all that we do and helps define and target what we're going to fund and who, so we can make the best impact. We're also doing a lot of work in the K through 12 space. We didn't do any of that before, but we've deployed our research into poster boards and other educational materials that we share with education from grade school through into community college. And that's really been a big game changer in our world. Our unrestricted fund, we actually have grown that from that negative $250,000 to about $1 million positive, and Snap ENT is very helpful in being able to do that. We've spent a lot of time building up our technology, become very data driven, working with JFF as an example of really trying to expand how we do analytics around our work. And then, as I mentioned, we had no marketing, but now we do a whole lot of marketing. And I feel that is so essential in being able to, you can't braid funding if you don't raise it, and you can't raise it if people don't know what you do. And we were that best kept secret, like many, and that's quite the backhanded compliment, but it's true. If you don't get the word out, nobody knows what you do. And so we put a lot of effort into newsletters, social media, public speaking, you name it, in order to get the word out and to build new partnerships. And our team is great. We've built our team from about 40 staff members a decade ago to we're close to 100 now. And let's see what else to cover here. We kind of frame our work in what we call our 5 pillars, which are our strategic guardrails for what we're all about. So it's job quality, 2Gen solutions, outcomes focused funding. So it's all about the outcomes versus just more of the outputs. Inclusive business growth. So we partner very closely with our employment community so that they are close partners with us in being able to target what they need and how we can support them. And then population specific interventions. So with the funding that we're able to bring from private and philanthropic resources, we can do a lot more targeted interventions that we weren't able to do before. And let's see. You're not seeing the PowerPoint, so I'm gonna wrap it up there. That's a snapshot of who we are and where we're going. Like I mentioned, the 50% federal now coming from 100% in the past has taken a lot of work, but it's doable. It happens with really it comes down to relationship development again and getting the word out. If we don't tell our partners or potential partners what we're doing, why in the world would they fund us? And also the outlook with the public funding is nerve-wracking, because if we can't get Congress to get behind and catch up on the deficit of federal funds that we've seen in the past couple decades, at least catch that up and expand it, we're all going to have a very hard time of being able to make the broad scale impact and to raise up our workforce that is desperately needed. And let's all cross our fingers. If anybody knows Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema and you want to give them a ring and tell them to pass this bill, that would be great. But that will be a game changer. If it's the full 100 billion, that would be great. If it's half that, still acceptable, because we have a lot to catch up on. And even with a $40 million budget, it feels like we're not able to get to half of the need in our region. So much more is needed in order to reach people where they are, to uplift them, to find creative ways to braid these different funding sources that Brianna's raised on the public level, but then really working very intentionally with the private sector and philanthropic partners, because they do want to invest in this work. We just have to give them a good reason for it, give them great outcomes, and then that leads to much more partnership down the road. So Brianna, with that, I'll pass it to you. That's a little snapshot of what we're doing in San Diego. And like everywhere, we feel like we're a work in progress. We've made great progress in a lot of areas, much more improvement ahead, but that's where we're at.
Great. Thanks, Peter, for that quick overview of the work you're doing in the San Diego partnership. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat, but I actually have some questions for you, Peter.
All right.
I'm curious about applying a racial equity lens to this work and what that has looked like for the San Diego partnership.
We've really leaned very hard into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and very proud of the progress we've made. The social unrest that has been a result of all of the tragedy in recent times has really re-emphasized what we need to do in order to be a voice about that, because it's always been core to what we're all about. And I think throughout the workforce development space, but not enough has been maybe done to elevate it and make it a very central issue with what we do and how we message to our partners. And so we've put out a number of articles around DEI. We have a DEI center on our on our website now that actually is ready to launch. It's bringing together all the different efforts that we're doing. And it really is just central to all that we do. And we have to always be mindful of how much more can we do? How much better can we partner with who we get the public dollars to, as well as the direct delivery of service that we do. So we've changed our procurement policies, for example. So we want to make sure that our funded partners have DEI at the core of what they do, with our own practices, our recruitment and hiring, and how we are looking for team members. So it's, as tragic as things have been, it's been a real inflection point and positive movement for us. And in fact, we also created, for the first time, a standing committee of our board around DEI, so that we can have them continue to have that lens on the external scale of how do we do this work better and keep this important conversation going. It can't be one and done, because it's not in the headlines every day, but we got to make it central to what we do. And I'm proud that we're doing that.
Yeah, I love that you are specifically making sure that your board also has that lens and are very critical about where you decide to accept funding from, and making sure that they have that DEI lens. Another question that I have for you is around the advocacy strategies that you use. What advocacy strategies did you use to achieve braided funding that you think would be replicable for our audience members?
Advocacy, both at the elected official level, and then again in the private sector and philanthropic space. So it all starts with, is this what you want to do? And do you have the team in order to make this happen? Because in some cultures, it will be, well, that's not what we do. We rely on the formula funding, and that's good enough, and that's important work. But going out and raising other dollars is a bit anathema to some groups. And if you're not a 501c, it's certainly harder. So if you're a city or county embedded workforce entity, it's a different setup. In our case, we're a 501c3, so we can work with the partners, but they don't come looking for us. We have to go find them and then build these relationships. So the advocacy is ongoing through, again, the relationship development. But I go back to, if you don't tell your story through newsletters, social media, a whole lot of creative ways to really amplify the work, they won't even know what you're doing. So share the successes, the struggles. And so it's a broader effort than simple advocacy of just calling on our electeds, because we're close to our electeds, our mayors and council members and supervisors, and know our state and congressional representatives. And that's great, but they're moving the needle on some of the public funding. But if you really want to expand and get much more flexible, private sector and philanthropy is where it's at. And that is a daily rigor of looking for who's out there, and then writing really good grants, hopefully winning them. And then once you win them, deploy them very well. And so it's in our DNA. It's how we go about our work, so that we keep looking for new opportunities to expand our work. Like in communications, having a team like that allows us to really branch off, which has helped us build up our K through 12 work. And that's fairly non-traditional in some workforce spaces, because generally we're from youth through adult, with the emphasis on adult or dislocated workers. But we want to get in very early with K through 12 and share our research and LMI knowledge, so that they can use that in reaching kids at a very young age, so that they're aware of the career pathways out there and who they are and how to tap into them. I think that's been a missing piece in our work for some time, and it's not funded. So we've raised private sector and philanthropic dollars to be able to do that work in a pretty robust way now.
I really appreciate your comment around having to go out to build the partnerships, like they're not going to come to you. So being really intentional about that. So we have some questions in the chat. So on SNAP ENT, one issue we've run into is promoting paid work-based learning, but the pay can then disqualify people for SNAP and SNAP ENT eligibility. So need to use non-SNAP dollars to maintain continuity. Do you run into this? What funding sources do you use to complement SNAP E&T if people have earnings?
Great question, and I don't have a good answer for you. We have a team member who's really been leading the SNAP E&T. So if you email me offline, peterc@workforce.org, I'm happy to connect you with our internal expert who's really been guiding that work and seeing what you can overcome. But appreciate the question. I just don't know the answer.
Great. And if you could drop your email in the chat, Peter, that would be
Sure.
great. And then another question is, if private sector / corporate dollars are part of your braided funding, are the corporate dollars targeted to any specific area or issue?
Yeah, it all depends on that partner and what we've pitched to them. Like one of our wonderful partners over time now for 5 years has been the James Irvine Foundation out of the Bay Area, and they only fund within California. But the first round of funding went to opportunity youth work and youth employment that we were doing and still do to this day. The second round of 1.2 million a few years ago was to help launch our income share agreement initiative that is an alternative to student loans for people to access post-secondary education. And we're continuing to do that work, and it's been great, but that was a very targeted ask and they supported it. And then most recently, we pitched a cybersecurity training program to Irvine, and they are funding that at 1.5 million to reach underserved and underrepresented people to get them into these great careers. And so it all depends in the end. So another example is we've been running Tech Hire since, 5-6 years ago now, and it was been primarily City of San Diego funded through CDBG, and it's been very successful. So we reached out to our partners to help amplify and grow that. And so the San Diego Foundation and Bank of America both came on board in the past year to add to that so that we can reach, in the case of that expansion, that was targeted for the Black community. So all of the new members for Tech Hire and what's called Construction Career Jumpstart are all for Black community members. So we work with who the funder is, what they're interested in, does it fit where we are and how we can staff it or fund it, then off we go.
Great, thanks for sharing that example. I specifically like how that specific example was focused on racial equity and thinking about how corporate dollars, particularly given the current climate, can be leveraged to advance racial equity.
Yeah, like the San Diego Foundation, just during the pandemic, they launched a new fund within their larger foundation called the Black Community Investment Fund. And they invited us to participate as a member of this committee, and they funded in 4 key areas: climate and workforce education and so forth. And then Bank of America came on board, but because of that relationship and sharing what we've been doing, they came on board between them for $500,000 to help us expand that work, and all targeted for Black community members.
That's awesome. We also have a question that I think is a nice segue into the next part of our session, asking if there's a resource to learn about how to do braided funding or how to strategize around maximizing funding. And that's going to be the focus of our breakout group. So I am going to share my screen again. So Peter, thank you so much for providing that overview. So now we're going to transition over to a breakout group activity. And the breakout groups, you're going to brainstorm ways to braid funding and how to advocate for the braiding of these funds to achieve policy and programmatic goals. Then we're all going to come back together as a large group and share what we discuss. So the breakout group activity is actually going to utilize a resource that NSC put together to help facilitate this conversation. To access the resource, you're going to have to go to the Skills in the States Forum platform landing page and scroll all the way to the bottom and click on the a workshop on braided funding link to download the resource. So if everyone could just spend a minute doing that really quickly. So it's at the bottom of the landing page. And if you're not able to find the resource, let me know and we'll make sure that you get it. Once you have the resource open, if you could give like a thumbs up or something so that I know that you successfully were able to download it, that would be great. Yeah, so if you go to the skills in the states forum landing page, or just like the entry page to the forum, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's like a list of resources. You can also click the resource button that's on the top of the screen. And then you can go to a workshop on braided funding. And I can probably stop sharing this PowerPoint and demonstrate for you all. So if you're on the landing page and you click on resources at the top, or if you choose to scroll all the way down, there's a list of resources associated with each session. So if you scroll all the way down, the resource that you want to download is the one that's all the way at the bottom, titled A Workshop on Braiding Funding. Again, if you have any problems accessing it, let me know, because we're going to use that resource in the breakout group. Great. So hopefully everyone was able to access that resource. If you have any trouble, your facilitator and your breakout group can help you access the resource. So a little bit about this resource. The resource that you will have downloaded is 4 pages long. The first 2 pages provide a high-level overview of different federal funding streams, which I already presented on. The last page is a sample budget that shows how funds may be braided in practice. But for the purposes of the breakout group activity, you will be using page 3 of the resource. The chart on page 3 outlines how different federal funding streams can be used to support administrative purposes, supportive services, and programmatic uses. A quick disclaimer: this is a very simplified version of how these funds may be used. These funds may be used in additional ways not indicated on the chart. And obviously, some funds are restricted to specific populations. However, for the purposes of this breakout group activity, we try to simplify things as much as possible. You'll notice that in some of the boxes, it will say cohorts or temporary, and that's to indicate that the funding is temporary or can be used for cohort-based groups. So for instance, Perkins funding can be used to fund staffing if it's temporary in nature, not ongoing. And then under WIOA, classroom instruction is usually covered under tuition and fees and not separately, but instruction costs can be covered if a special course or series of courses is offered to a cohort of participants. And then for SNAP ENT, it can be a big supplanting issue to charge for instruction, but special courses that are not already offered could be set up for a cohort of SNAP ENT students. So for instance, like a healthcare bridge program. I hope that provides some clarity on the chart. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask your facilitator in the breakout group. Again, this is a heavily simplified version of how funding may be used, created specifically for this activity. So in the breakout groups, we're going to ask people to volunteer a specific policy or programmatic goals they would like to advance in their respective states that would benefit from braided funding. You'll work with your group to determine what funding streams may be used to achieve that goal using page 3 of the resource. And you'll also brainstorm advocacy strategies to successfully braid funds. So we're going to go ahead and break out into the respective breakout groups. All right, it looks like everyone is back. And so now we're going to do a quick share back and then open discussion up to the broader group if anyone has any questions. So if we could start with group 1, if you all remember the number of your group.
I think group 1 was mine, and Tabitha Gaines is going to share off my group.
Ooh, Tabitha, it doesn't seem like we can hear you.
I was in Tabitha's group. In the chat, it sounds like her sound is not working. Happy to jump in. Emma Calloway, she, her pronouns. I mean, our group talked about a lot of issues, certainly income disregards and where states could do a better job of really making it possible for people to participate in these programs. We also talked a little, I plugged kind of data sharing between agencies at the state level so that when folks are about to hit a benefits cliff, that institutions can have, you know, the right resources to jump in. And then both Linda and Cher on our team talked about kind of like specific examples where braiding either at an individual level can be really helpful, or raising funds like more globally to help large cohorts to think about braiding funding in multiple ways. And looks like Tabitha's trying again. I can see there we go. Did I get everything, Tabitha? Okay. Looks like that's it from our team. Great team discussion. Okay.
Thank you, Emma. I appreciate that. That also came up, and the idea of data sharing also came up in my group. And I will actually turn it over to Janie to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we discussed.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'm Janie with the Annie Casey Foundation. We talked about 2 scenarios in our group. One was using ARP funds to support digital literacy for displaced workers and what sources we could use to provide more supportive services. We talked about SNAP ENT, TANF, CCDF, and if the students were eligible, TAA. As for some of the advocacy strategies we talked about the need to bring agencies together, relationship building, going back to Peter's presentation earlier, developing task forces across the state that focus on supports maybe for specific populations or sector partnerships, and also thinking creatively about shared outcomes and goals and being able to make the case to different partners who might need to be kind of swayed of, you know, why they should care about braiding these funds and supporting this work. And also we talked about the importance of data sharing. And also somebody brought up submitting integrated plans. For example, you can submit integrated plans for WIO and Perkins, and that's a good way to make sure you're definitely thinking about braiding. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Janie. That was a perfect summary of what we discussed. Group 3, if you could share the strategies that you discussed, that'd be great.
Brianna, am I group 3?
Yes, you're group 3. The last group.
I'll invite other folks to share, but I think the major theme was we were lucky enough to have Peter in our group, and we talked a little bit about some of the things he talked about in his presentation about the importance of building relationships and partnerships, and talked a little bit about having private folks and private sector be a part of the conversation and support around funding. And does anyone else in my group want to share?
Yeah, thanks for summarizing, Michael. And to the the discussion in other groups around data sharing, that's so important and something we're really trying to solve here in a region. So one way we're doing it regionally that's really interesting is our local 211 is a very robust entity, and they built a thing called the Community Information Exchange, CIE. And take a look at them. There's a site at 211 San Diego. So that's a local way of sharing across a lot of disparate entities in a very creative way. It's been going on for a decade. They put on a great conference, and I think they're really leading the country. On a statewide level, we're still trying to crack this nut with Employment Development Department, because there's different opinions on what data we can access of our own data from CalJobs and the state system around wage level data. And so we're working hard at that, but without good information there, it's really difficult for us to be able to even measure and report and celebrate results. And so we're really pushing on that. If we can solve that one with we have a new Secretary of Labor since Julie Sue went to DC, as you all may know. But we're not going to give up on it, because without good data sharing, we're all a bit handcuffed, and it makes this work far harder than it needs to be.
Thanks for sharing that, Peter. That's something that also came up in our group about the importance of data sharing and how necessary that is to successfully braid funds and to justify braiding funds and putting in the effort that it takes to build partnerships for that to be successful. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I just want to open it the floor for any final questions or comments that people might have before we end this session.
I could just throw in one more quick thing. If you've seen, JFF is doing this Outcomes for Opportunities initiative, and we're a part of that, and really, really excited about it, because it's a way to really finally, hopefully, get to really good data visualization of the impact of workforce efforts across the country. This is an area of great weakness in our field, and we have a hard time of telling our story and impact. And when it comes to advocacy for more funds, if we can't tell them all the great impact that's going on, we are playing catch up. And so this work of JFF's is really, really important.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Peter. I've dropped information in the chat about some of the things that Peter has discussed. So any final questions before we wrap up the session? Okay, well, thank you so much, Peter, for taking the time to speak to everyone about the great work that the San Diego Workforce Partnership is doing. If you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to either Peter and I, and thank you for joining the session.
And Brianna, thank you to you and the NSC team. You guys do amazing work on advocacy, and it's so helpful in our field. We really rely on you and what you're doing in DC, and just sharing the word is so greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Right.